You've probably met someone who possesses an almost magnetic quality, not through constant chatter or desperate attention-seeking, but through their mysterious absence. They don't chase. They don't explain themselves endlessly. They simply step back. And in that space, everything transforms. The atmosphere shifts. People begin to wonder, to pursue, to recognize their value. What if I told you that this same power lies dormant within you? That the key isn't in being more present, but in learning when to disappear? The moment you stop offering yourself as an emotional vending machine, always ready to dispense comfort, advice, or validation at the push of a button, something remarkable happens. The systems that have grown accustomed to your constant availability begin to malfunction. People who took your presence for granted suddenly find themselves questioning everything. Carl Jung understood this deeply when he wrote about the shadow self and our unconscious patterns. He recognized that what disturbs us most in others often reflects our own hidden dependencies. Consider this carefully. When you become emotionally unreachable, who panics first? Who immediately tries to guilt you back into your old role? Who becomes frustrated when they can no longer predict your responses? These reactions tell you everything about the invisible chains that have been binding you. You've been caught in a web of others' expectations, constantly sacrificing your inner peace to maintain external harmony. Every automatic yes, every immediate reply, every emotional reaction given away freely has slowly drained your life force. And what remains after this endless giving? Exhaustion that sleep cannot cure, resentment you cannot name, a hollow feeling that follows you despite being surrounded by people. This happens because you've become too accessible to those who wouldn't spare you a moment of genuine consideration. This isn't about building walls against the world. It's about choosing yourself first. It's about what Jung called the journey toward wholeness, toward authentic selfhood. This transformation begins when you realize that your silence holds more power than 1,000 explanations. When your withdrawal comes from conscious choice rather than wounded reaction, it becomes an act of profound self-respect. So I challenge you now, how much longer will you allow others' emotions to dictate your inner state? How long will you dance to every tune that others play, reacting like a programmed response system? Perhaps it's time to cut those invisible strings and become the author of your own emotional story. Because when you stop being available to everyone, everything changes. From the earliest moments of childhood, you were trained to equate your worth with your usefulness to others. Teachers praised you for compliance. Parents rewarded you for being good, which often meant being available for their emotional needs. Society reinforced the message that your value lay in how quickly you responded, how much you could give, how little you required in return. But here's a truth that may shatter your worldview. This constant availability isn't nobility. It's a sophisticated form of self-imprisonment. As long as you believe your worth depends on being perpetually accessible, you will remain trapped in cycles of manipulation and depletion. People begin to see you as predictable, and predictability transforms you into a tool. You become their emotional emergency contact, activated when they need comfort, validation, or distraction, then forgotten until the next crisis. The cruel irony is that your very availability makes you invisible. Jung spoke extensively about the persona, the mask we wear to gain acceptance and love. This mask keeps you perpetually available because you fear that saying no means losing connection. You suppress your exhaustion and say, "I'm fine." You respond to messages even when your energy is depleted. You explain, justify, and defend your every action as if the world owns pieces of your soul. But here's what's really happening. The more you center others in your life's drama, the more you disappear from your own story. This excessive availability is actually a disguised form of self-abandonment. It's your unconscious attempt to control how others perceive you, to avoid rejection, to maintain an illusion of being needed. But this control costs you everything: your peace, your energy, your authentic self. The people who demand your constant availability don't actually want you. They want what you provide: the validation, the entertainment, the emotional labor. When you finally establish boundaries, these same people become hostile, claiming you've changed. The truth is, you've simply stopped being functional for their unconscious needs. Here's the paradox that will revolutionize your understanding. The more available you make yourself, the less others value you. What's always present becomes background noise. What requires no effort to obtain loses its preciousness. No one respects what they don't have to earn. So pause and ask yourself, who truly deserves access to your energy? Who has earned the right to your presence? And perhaps more importantly, who deserves to experience your absence? But before we can answer these questions, we must understand why we react so automatically, why we give ourselves away so easily. The answer lies in what Jung called psychic energy, the fundamental life force that powers every thought, emotion, and action. This energy is finite, precious, and currently being stolen from you in ways you haven't even recognized. Your energy is all you truly possess, and if you don't learn to guard it consciously, others will use it against you. Jung didn't view human psychology as a simple stimulus-response machine. He understood that our minds operate as complex energy systems, where every thought, emotion, and reaction consumes psychic fuel. The critical question becomes, are you consciously directing where your energy flows, or are you allowing the external world to make that choice for you? Every impulsive reaction depletes your inner reserves. When you defend yourself against criticism that deserved no attention, when you engage with provocations just to prove your point, when you participate in meaningless arguments, when you exhaust yourself trying to please the unpleasable, you're hemorrhaging the very force that should be building your authentic life. Jung's insight cuts deep. What you resist persists. The more you react emotionally to external triggers, the more entangled you become in others' psychological dramas. People living in constant emotional exhaustion aren't weak. They're simply misdirecting their life force toward things that drain rather than nourish them. And here's what happens to someone operating from this depleted state. They become prey. Manipulative individuals possess an almost supernatural ability to detect emotional vulnerability. They sense when someone hasn't learned to protect their psychic boundaries, when someone reacts to every stimulus, when someone is perpetually trying to fix everyone else's problems. These emotional predators feed off your unguarded energy. Jung emphasized that psychological health requires keeping energy within your own system. This means mastering the art of selective response, knowing when to say no without guilt, when to remain silent without feeling cowardly, when to observe before acting. True power isn't found in reaction, it's discovered in conscious choice. How many sleepless nights have you sacrificed to unresolved conversations? How many hours have you lost ruminating over what you should have said or trying to decode why someone treated you poorly? This is your life force being drained with no return on investment. You're keeping alive psychological ghosts that should have been buried long ago, feeding dynamics that exist only because you continue engaging with them. Psychic energy, properly conserved, creates what Jung called presence, that quality that commands respect without demanding it. But when scattered and mismanaged, you become emotionally invisible, reactive, fragile. The world shows no mercy to those who haven't learned to guard their inner resources. Begin observing your automatic triggers. What situations make you lose your center instantly? What patterns make you react without thinking? These are the exact points where your energy escapes, and they're precisely where your work begins. The goal isn't to become cold or disconnected, but to become sovereign over your own psychic territory. When you learn to conserve your energy consciously, something profound happens. You shatter the projections that others have placed upon you. And this disturbs people more than you might expect, because now we're entering the shadowy realm of unconscious manipulation, where people feed off your energy without either of you fully realizing it. You believe your emotional responses are conscious choices, expressions of your authentic self. But the disturbing truth is that most of your reactions are programmed responses, installed by years of conditioning and triggered by those who understand how to push your buttons. Manipulative people don't need to raise their voices or make obvious threats. They simply activate the emotional triggers you've left exposed, and you respond exactly as they expect, every single time. Jung's concept of projection reveals how people unconsciously cast their inner world onto others. But there's a darker side to this phenomenon that most people miss. While others project their unconscious material onto you, you become the screen for their psychological movies. The more emotionally available you make yourself, the more you become a blank canvas for others' projections. That friend who only contacts you during personal crises, that family member who praises you only when you're useful, that colleague who sees you as their emotional support system. None of this is accidental. They're not relating to the real you. They're relating to the role you've agreed to play in their psychological drama. And why do you agree to these roles? Because you fear disappointing others, fear losing connection, fear being alone. The most sophisticated manipulation doesn't happen through shouting or obvious coercion. It happens through the quiet installation of guilt, when you feel obligated to be available, compelled to help, responsible for others' emotional states, even when it's destroying your inner peace. Here's the key insight. Manipulators don't need to control you directly. They simply need you to keep reacting in predictable ways. But when you stop responding according to script, when you start saying no, when you choose silence over explanation, when you withdraw instead of engaging, the entire game collapses. The projections begin crumbling because you've stopped participating in their psychological theater. This leaves people deeply unsettled because they no longer recognize you, and worse, they're forced to confront aspects of themselves they've been avoiding. Your new unavailability becomes threatening because it forces others to face their own inner emptiness. The silence you offer reveals the internal noise they've been trying to escape. This is when the attacks come, the criticism, the emotional manipulation, the dramatic scenes. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've stopped serving as their convenient psychological mirror. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you withdraw from these dysfunctional patterns, others' shadow aspects begin emerging. This is unbearable for those who have used you as their escape from self-awareness. But are you prepared for what comes next? Are you ready to be misunderstood, rejected, or even attacked for protecting your psychic boundaries? Because it's precisely in that uncomfortable space that a new kind of power is born, the power of conscious silence. We live in a world obsessed with noise. Everyone demands to be heard immediately, wants to win pointless debates, needs to prove their position, regardless of the cost to their inner peace. But there exists a power that few recognize and even fewer master, the power of conscious silence. Not the silence of defeat or passivity, but strategic, lucid, deliberately chosen silence. The kind of silence that isn't absence, but intensified presence. Jung understood silence not as emptiness, but as fertile ground for inner transformation. When you stop reacting automatically, you begin observing consciously. Through observation, you recognize patterns that were previously invisible. Emotional cycles, manipulation strategies, self-sabotaging behaviors. Silence creates space for clarity, and clarity is dangerous to those who profit from your confusion. Have you noticed how certain people panic when you don't respond immediately? when you refuse to explain yourself, when you simply disappear from their drama. It's not because they miss your presence, it's because your silence strips away their narrative control. While you're speaking, you're still playing their game. But when you become silent, you change the rules entirely. This shift unbalances anyone who thrives on your predictable reactions. True silence isn't the absence of voice, it's mastery over your own energy. It's refusing to be dragged into others' emotional chaos. It's the conscious choice not to engage in battles unworthy of your attention. Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self, requires this kind of distancing because only in silence can you hear your own voice above the world's constant demands. But don't be naive about the price. Silence will separate you from people who valued you only for the role you played. It will make you incomprehensible to those who knew you only through their projections. Some will call you cold, distant, arrogant. But these reactions come from people who never wanted to engage with your depth, only your utility. As you mature psychologically, you become increasingly selective with your words, understanding that each sentence is an energetic investment. Not everyone deserves access to your inner truth. Sometimes silence isn't retreat, it's sovereignty. It's the language of those who no longer need external validation. Silence disturbs others because it forces them to confront their own thoughts, their own internal noise. This discomfort reveals more about them than any argument could. You don't need to justify your absence. It speaks for itself. Those who feel threatened by your silence reveal how much they depended on your emotional reactivity to maintain their own psychological balance. The most powerful silence isn't the kind that disturbs others. It's the silence that reconstructs you from within, connecting you to something beyond external approval. Understanding these concepts intellectually means nothing if you continue saying yes when you mean no, responding to every message that disturbs your peace, participating in empty conversations, maintaining relationships that exist only through habit and fear. Awareness without action is just sophisticated self-deception. Real transformation begins when you make the firm decision to become selective with your energy, your time, your presence. Conscious unavailability isn't about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about refusing to be accessible to anyone, anytime, for any reason they deem important. It's about reclaiming control over your own energy, your own schedule, your own peace. This starts with small but significant actions, not responding immediately to every message, breathing deeply before reacting emotionally, leaving conversations before they descend into chaos, turning off your phone without guilt, saying not today, saying I'm not interested, saying I won't participate. Here's the most liberating truth. You don't need to justify your absence or explain your silence. You owe nothing to anyone except yourself. For many people, this is unforgivable because when you refuse to explain yourself, you remove their power to keep you trapped in emotional narratives where you're always the helpful, understanding, available one. Jung understood that every individuation process includes periods of necessary isolation, not depressive withdrawal, but sacred solitude. Time spent in inner retreat, relearning to hear your own voice without the world's interference, rebuilding your identity from your own center rather than others' expectations. Want to measure your psychological evolution? Notice who distances themselves when you become more reserved. Observe who tries provoking you when you stop reacting automatically. Watch who accuses you of changing when you finally start protecting yourself. These aren't signs you're doing something wrong. They're proof you've begun liberating yourself. Being unavailable feels uncomfortable initially. You'll experience guilt, worry you're being selfish, hear criticism that you're too harsh. This discomfort is part of the deconstruction process. You've spent your life conditioned to put yourself second. It's natural that change creates turbulence, not only within you, but among everyone who benefited from your previous version. Conscious unavailability forms the foundation of self-determination. When you say no to the world's demands, you're saying yes to yourself. When you withdraw from toxic environments, you're affirming that your peace matters more than false connections. When you stop explaining yourself, you begin commanding respect, even if from fewer people. But not everyone can handle this kind of presence, because your emotional absence will expose wounds they don't want to acknowledge. It will reveal how much they depended on your emotional chaos to feel stable in their own lives. This is when the rupture occurs, the separation, the loneliness, the alienation, the feeling that you're losing something precious when actually you're freeing yourself from invisible chains. But what emerges from this temporary isolation? What's born from the conscious choice to be misunderstood rather than diminished? When you stop being available to everyone, something profound begins unfolding. First comes the silence, an uncomfortable quiet that seems to echo inside your mind. You question whether you made the right choice, whether you're being too rigid, whether you're losing people who genuinely cared. But gradually, this silence transforms. It begins cleansing old patterns, calming inner turbulence, healing wounds you didn't know existed. Then comes solitude, not the solitude of abandonment, but the solitude of complete self-presence. The solitude of the psychologically strong, of one who no longer betrays themselves to keep others comfortable. In this space where confusion once reigned, clarity emerges. Where anxiety lived, peace takes residence. Where neediness existed, a new kind of strength develops, the strength of being whole within yourself. Jung taught that individuation requires temporary separation from collective expectations, disidentification from social masks, walking alone for a period. This is exactly what happens when you choose conscious unavailability. You're not fleeing the world, you're returning to yourself. At this point, you stop being merely reactive and become genuinely creative. You cease being shaped by circumstances and begin shaping reality from your authentic center. People who feel uncomfortable with your absence reveal they never wanted the real you. They wanted the role you performed. Now that you no longer fit their script, they don't know how to relate to you. This realization is liberating. You will lose people, but you'll find yourself. You'll distance yourself from familiar places, but you'll reconnect with your essence. You'll become misunderstood by many, but finally respected by those who matter. When you're no longer available for everything, you become valuable, rare, unforgettable. Don't mistake this process. It's a rebirth, a genuine new beginning, the start of a life where you no longer accept emotional scraps, psychological games, or emptiness disguised as affection. Now you only welcome what resonates with your peace, your truth, your wholeness. If you've stayed with me this far, part of you is already prepared for this transformation. Part of you understands that being loved means nothing if you must abandon yourself to receive it. True self-love begins when you choose yourself, even if it means being alone for a while. So I ask you directly, are you ready to be misunderstood, rejected, or even criticized in service of your inner freedom? Are you willing to pay the price of becoming authentically yourself? If this message resonates with your soul, if it makes sense to who you're becoming, write in the comments, I choose myself. Let's see how many are ready for this profound transition. Remember to subscribe for more content on psychological transformation and authentic living. Your journey toward wholeness starts with a single conscious choice.